If there's one thing we Australians cannot stomach, it is being played for fools. And this week, our BS monitors are off the Richter scale, as they pivot from photos with sick children to a $3,000 VIP ticket-only weekend. The shameless Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have clearly been planning this rehabilitation tour for some time.
Harry and Meghan's Australia tour was meant to build their image, but the reaction flipped almost instantly. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced speaking events with premium ticket prices, attention quickly shifted from the message to the cost, and questions about the pricing and what was being offered started building fast. As scrutiny grew, another development involving Prince William added a new layer that few saw coming, raising bigger questions about the direction of their brand. So what really happened during Harry and Meghan's Australia tour? And how does it connect to the bigger picture surrounding their public image? Join us as we break down the story. Australia went badly wrong. When Harry and Meghan touched down on a Qantas flight in first class to begin their 4-day Australian tour covering Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney, they were walking into what should have been the most sympathetic territory available to them outside of California. Australia is a Commonwealth nation with a long and genuinely warm history with the British royal family. More importantly, it is a country that had already shown Harry and Meghan specifically what genuine enthusiasm looks like, because when they first visited in 2018, with Meghan visibly pregnant with Archie, the Australian welcome was extraordinary. People were not just politely supportive. They saw in this couple the possibility of something the royal family had never quite been before, and they opened their arms completely. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry set their sights on Australia, it wasn't supposed to be just another random trip. They had an aim in mind, and it was a test of who they had become after stepping away from royal life. The goal was clear: reposition themselves as global voices with influence that is beyond the monarchy. Through themes like mental health and support for veterans, they aimed to present a more purposeful, impact-driven identity. But there was another layer beneath it all. These appearances were also about building a sustainable future, one where their name could command attention, audiences, and serious revenue without royal backing. Australia was supposed to be the stage to achieve that. The challenge? Public perception didn't fully align with the message. What was meant to feel meaningful to some came across as exclusive to others. And that tension is what turned the tour into something far more talked about than they may have expected. That context makes what journalist and commentator Angela Millard said on live Australian television so significant, because Angela was not speaking from a position of pre-existing hostility toward the couple. She was speaking from a country that had already decided it loved them and then watched them choose a different path entirely, a path that was going to destroy everything. Her words were direct, and they were damaging. She said Australians were outraged that this couple had arrived and were using the country as a cash machine. She said they were no longer royalty adjacent, that they were not qualified psychologists, and that, as far as visible charitable donations were concerned, there was essentially nothing to point to as evidence of the philanthropic identity they consistently claimed to hold. Part of the Australian itinerary involved visits to a children's hospital and a homeless charity, which sounds admirable until you ask the question that Angela asked on air. What credentials do they bring to those institutions? What specific expertise or training or sustained commitment to those causes makes Harry and Meghan the right people to walk into a children's hospital and be presented as something more than very famous visitors who happened to be there on the same afternoon their tour schedule required a charitable stop? Working royals carry institutional weight into those visits that gives the presence meaning beyond celebrity. Harry and Meghan stepped away from that institutional backing in 2020. What they kept was the name, the titles, and the brand recognition. What they left behind was the framework that made charitable visits into something more than highly photographed appearances. Bev Turner made a point that was equal parts honest and genuinely sad. She said she had been speaking to Americans who were reminiscing about the royal wedding, about how wonderful it was, and how the entire world had welcomed Meghan with open arms and genuine hope. and that the feeling at the time was that she was dragging the royal family into the 21st century in a way that could have been extraordinary. And then, Bev said the thing that no amount of spokesperson framing can undo. She just blew it. Both of them. Not just Meghan, because Harry is not a puppet and never has been, and he made choices at every turn that brought him to exactly this moment just as much as any influence from his wife. The Australian public loved the idea of what this couple could have become. What they were watching in real time was what this couple actually chose to be instead. And the distance between those two things is precisely where all the outrage lives. But if the public outrage in Australia was the opening wound, the ticket sales data was the salt poured directly into it, because the numbers told a story that no press release was going to rewrite. What exactly happened with the ticket sales, and what did it reveal about the entire situation? The tickets nobody bought. Interestingly, the events were not sold out, and that fact alone would have been manageable if it had been quietly buried in the scheduling details. But it was not buried at all, because Angela Millard confirmed it live on air, noting that as of that morning, tickets remained available across multiple events in the tour lineup. The Zoom event featuring Harry had open seats. Extra rooms had reportedly been added to Meghan's Best Life Summit to accommodate anticipated demand, and those additional spaces were not filled either, a detail that carries its own specific embarrassment, because people only add rooms to an event when they believe demand will require them, and the decision to add them becomes publicly visible evidence that the demand you anticipated simply did not materialize in the numbers you were counting on. Journalists who applied for inside viewing access were turned down, which meant the press could not independently document attendance figures or verify the atmosphere inside the room. A couple that consistently describes its work as being about reaching people and creating impact chose to keep the media away from the events where that impact was supposed to be demonstrated, which is the kind of decision that generates exactly the kind of speculation it is designed to prevent. Panel member Andy Williams pulled the financial thread further than the ticket sales alone, and what he revealed about the broader money situation reframes the entire Australian tour in a way that makes the desperation underneath it impossible to ignore. He pointed out that Spotify paid them a reported $20 million and then walked away from the relationship entirely. Netflix, which had signed them to an 8-figure deal in the optimism of 2020, has been steadily pulling back from the level of investment it originally committed to. The lifestyle brand that Meghan launched, selling products at premium prices, has been described by multiple commentators as struggling to justify its costs to its target audience. And then, there is the security overhead that most public conversations about this couple's finances somehow manage to avoid entirely. Harry and Meghan reportedly operate with 12 security personnel, and the United States government has consistently refused their requests for official protection, which means every dollar of that security bill comes directly out of their own earnings at a monthly rate that would create serious financial pressure for almost any income structure that was not actively and significantly growing. Williams said it with the bluntness the situation deserves, that the grift is up. Harry is not getting hired at the rate he was in 2020. The big deals that defined the first phase of their post-royal commercial life are either gone or contracting. The Australian tour is not a statement of momentum. It is a response to financial reality, and the Australian public can feel the difference between a couple that has something genuine to offer and a couple that needs the money that comes from offering it. That financial reality did not arrive suddenly or without warning, and it did not build itself in a vacuum. It was constructed decision by decision, reaction by reaction, by two people with a specific and identifiable character flaw that the people around them understood far too late to change the direction of anything. The question is, where did they go wrong? And why would it be difficult to fix it now? The flaw they never fixed The most intellectually honest moment in the entire television discussion came when Angela Mollard was asked directly what the specific flaw in Harry and Meghan's character is that led to this dramatic reversal in public opinion, and she did not reach for selfishness, which would have been the easy answer, or arrogance, which would have been the expected one. Her simple answer was the couple's reactiveness, the inability to pause. The consistent pattern of responding emotionally and immediately to situations that required patience, long-term thinking, and a willingness to sit inside the discomfort of an imperfect situation long enough to shape it into something better. The Queen had offered them multiple genuine paths forward that would have given Meghan everything her ambition required, while keeping Harry connected to the institution and the family he came from. They could have operated as a diffusion line of the royal family, retaining institutional backing while working with more personal independence. They could have been posted in Canada or Australia, giving Meghan a new cultural context without the claustrophobia of London palace life. The Queen had specifically offered them the role of Commonwealth Youth Ambassadors, which would have handed them a direct platform with the young populations across a Commonwealth that is demographically overwhelmingly youthful and hungry for exactly the kind of modern, accessible royal representation this couple could have provided better than anyone before them. Every single one of those paths required compromise. Every single one of them required the patience that reactiveness makes impossible. And every single one of them would have produced a version of this story that looks nothing like standing in Australia charging £1,675 for a seat to hear them speak about workplace conflict and mental health. Subjects the panel addressed with a mixture of disbelief and dark humor, given that Harry's relationship with workplace conflict consists primarily of having fallen out with every member of his professional family, and that a couple seeking to advise others on mental health has publicly and repeatedly failed to maintain even basic contact with their own relatives. Angela added the staff pattern as further evidence of the same underlying problem, noting that the multiple communications directors who have left their operation over a short number of years sends an institutional message that reaches far beyond whatever spokesperson statements those directors were hired to manage. How do you convince a country that you have something genuine to offer when the people whose professional purpose was to believe in you enough to represent you publicly keep deciding that belief is not sustainable for them either? Michelle Donnellan added the layer that the public keeps bumping into and cannot explain away: the visible gap between what this couple says and what they demonstrably do. The privacy claims exist alongside the social media presence. The desire for a normal family life is announced through tell-all interviews, watched by tens of millions. The rejection of the royal institution is communicated through content that consistently and commercially leans on the royal titles those children carry. Either privacy matters or it does not, and the evidence of how this couple actually behaves suggests that privacy is a selective tool deployed when it protects the brand from scrutiny and set aside when the brand benefits from exposure. All of that contradictory behavior eventually collapses into a single visible moment that the entire panel reacted to with genuine shock, and it came from an Instagram post that managed to put the central contradiction of the Sussex brand into two words that nobody could defend. The caption that broke everything. During the television discussion, footage emerged of Meghan sharing Instagram content from the Easter period, and this particular piece crystallized every contradiction in the Sussex position into a single, completely indefensible moment that the panel could not let pass without addressing directly. She showed her children with their faces hidden, consistent with the privacy framework she has publicly maintained around their appearance, but she called her son Prince Archie and her daughter Princess Lilibet in the caption. And Bev Turner's reaction to those two words was not diplomatic or measured, and was not trying to be either of those things. Because what Bev saw in that footage was not a small inconsistency, but the entire philosophical contradiction of the Sussex brand made visible in a single social media post. She said, "Hold on, you chose to step back from the royal family. You gave an interview to Oprah Winfrey that was watched by tens of millions of people, in which you described the institution in terms that left no ambiguity about your feelings toward it. You have made a public life in California built explicitly around the idea that you are something beyond and apart from the royal framework you left behind. You have stopped your children from maintaining contact with their cousins, the only other young people in the world who share the specific experience of carrying a royal identity from birth, and who could have been genuine peers to Archie and Lilibet in a way that no Californian private school enrollment can replicate. And then you go on Instagram and call them Prince and Princess. Bev called it disgusting and meant every syllable, because the title's question cuts to the absolute core of what the Sussex brand actually is and what it is commercially selling. The entitlement to those titles is legally legitimate, so when King Charles acceded to the throne, Archie and Lilibet became entitled to the Prince and Princess styles under the letters patent issued by King George V, and nobody is disputing the legal foundation of that. The question is not whether the titles exist. The question is what they mean when deployed on Instagram by a couple who have spent 5 years publicly distancing themselves from every other aspect of the institution that created and continues to legitimize those titles. If the institution matters enough to put its titles in your children's captions, then the institution matters. And if the institution matters, then the decision to leave it, to criticize it globally, and to build a commercial operation explicitly positioned as an alternative to it, requires a level of honest reckoning that this couple has never been willing to apply to their own choices. The answer the panel kept arriving at is that the titles are not being used to honor the institution. They are being used to monetize it from a safe distance, leveraging the royal identity as a commercial asset, while rejecting the accountability that comes attached to that identity in every other context. And there is one person in the royal family who has been watching that specific dynamic develop for 5 years from a position that gives him the institutional authority to formally address it. What he has done about it, in the fictional framework of our narrative, is the piece of this story that changes everything else. William's bombshell move. Prince William has been described by multiple royal sources as holding the firmest and least flexible position in the entire royal family when it comes to the Sussexes and what they are entitled to carry into their post-royal commercial future. And while King Charles has reportedly been more willing to leave space for some form of future reconciliation, more concerned with not escalating tensions and maintaining the monarchy's public stability, William's stance is built entirely around 2 words that leave no room for ambiguity: accountability and consequences. He is the future king, and he is also the man who has watched his brother build a commercial empire on the identity of an institution he simultaneously uses every available platform to criticize. In this scenario, the DNA twist is constitutional. It is about the institutional bloodline, the legal and royal precedent that governs what the Sussex titles actually mean in practice, what the palace formally recognizes as the conditions under which those titles can be commercially deployed, and what authority the future head of the institution holds over how the name and identity of that institution are used by people who left it. What William reveals is institutional clarity about something that has been deliberately kept ambiguous since 2020. The question of whether a couple who stepped back from working royal duties and built a commercial operation explicitly positioned as an alternative to the royal family can continue to leverage the royal identity of their children as the primary commercial asset of that operation, indefinitely, without any connection to or accountability toward the institution that created those titles and continues to give them whatever market value they carry. The clarity lands at the worst possible moment for the Sussex operation, right in the middle of an Australian tour where the primary commercial value being sold to ticket buyers at up to £1,675 per seat is precisely the royal-adjacent identity that William's institutional move begins to formally undermine. The titles do not legally disappear. Archie and Lilibet remain Prince and Princess under the letters patent. But the commercial weight those titles carry in a speaking tour context, in a lifestyle brand context, or in any deal-making context depends entirely on the public continuing to associate them with genuine royal authority. And genuine royal authority is something that William, as the future head of the institution, holds the keys to in a way that a California-based production company simply does not and never will. Meghan's stunned response is not the response of someone who did not know this moment was coming eventually. It is the response of someone who had been operating on the assumption that the ambiguity could be sustained indefinitely and that the brand could keep drawing on the institutional account without the institution ever formally calling the balance due. Angela Mollard touched on this dynamic when she said Australians feel like they are being played. And that feeling is real precisely because it comes from the visible gap between the royal identity being sold at premium prices and the actual institutional accountability that would justify selling it that way. Now, Prince William has closed that gap. The DNA of institutional authority runs through the palace and not through a speaking tour in Melbourne, and no Instagram caption with prince or princess in it changes that constitutional reality. But here is the question. The whole conversation leaves hanging. Why did the public not see this particular reckoning coming sooner? And what does the answer to that question reveal about where the Sussex story actually ends? Boring is more dangerous than being hated. Michelle Donnellan made the most quietly devastating observation of the entire discussion when she said she was a bit bored with the whole saga, and she said it while sitting on a panel that was actively covering the story, surrounded by people whose professional purpose in that moment was to generate engaging conversation about Harry and Meghan's Australian tour. That is not boredom as a personal preference. That is boredom as a precise diagnosis of where the public's relationship with this couple has genuinely arrived after 5 years of a story that has cycled through the same fundamental themes without ever resolving any of them. Privacy versus publicity, royal identity versus California lifestyle, authentic advocacy versus commercial exploitation of charitable language, and institutional accountability versus the freedom to use the institution's most valuable assets without any of its responsibilities, year after year, in slightly different packaging, with a slightly different backdrop, producing the same conversation that everyone on every side of it has already had so many times that even the people paid to be most invested in it are losing the ability to generate genuine interest. Andy Williams deepened the diagnosis with language that was more blunt, but pointed in exactly the same direction. He said they are irritating and vacuous, not evil, not monstrous, and not the worst people in the room, just deeply and exhaustingly dull, in the specific way that people who keep performing the same emotional cycle without ever arriving anywhere new eventually become to an audience that has been paying attention long enough to recognize the pattern. And boredom is more dangerous to a brand than anger is, because anger still generates the attention that keeps a brand commercially alive. Anger fills seats and drives clicks and produces the polarized engagement that platform algorithms reward and media cycles sustain. Boredom generates nothing. No clicks, no seats filled, no media energy, no reason for anyone to keep paying the prices this couple is charging for proximity to an identity that the public has already fully processed and filed away as a known quantity with no new information left to offer. The wedding generated the complete opposite of boredom. Bev Turner said she had been speaking to Americans who were reminiscing about it the way you reminisce about something genuinely significant, the global goodwill it attracted, the feeling that something was shifting in an institution that had spent a long time resisting the century it was actually living in. And Turner's summary of what happened to all of that possibility was 4 words that contain more honest analysis than most extended commentary manages to produce. She just blew it. The public's disappointment in Harry and Meghan is not really about who they are as human beings. It is about who they chose not to become when they had every structural advantage in place to become something genuinely remarkable. The Commonwealth Youth Ambassador role that the Queen offered would have given Meghan a platform, with real institutional weight behind it and a global audience hungry for the kind of modern, accessible royal representation this couple could have delivered better than anyone before them. None of that happened. And now, Australia gets a 4-day tour with unsold tickets and a media blackout, charging £1,675 for the proximity to a brand that is visibly contracting under the weight of the same contradiction it has been carrying since 2020. William's move is the institutional mirror held up to that contradiction. At the moment, it can no longer be ignored. The DNA of the royal institutions, its constitutional bloodline of authority, precedent, and accountability, does not bend to accommodate a brand that wants its benefits without its responsibilities. And the revelation that the future head of that institution is no longer willing to let the ambiguity sustain the brand indefinitely is the twist that gives everything else in this story its final, honest shape. The question the public is asking in Australia right now is the same one they have been asking quietly for 5 years. What exactly is this couple selling, and is it worth what they are charging for it? The answer is becoming clearer every week, and it is not the answer the Sussex team wants the world to arrive at. Is there any going back from this for Sussex? Or is their reputation damaged forever as long as the public is concerned? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.